December 18th, 1075 AD. This is the date of death for Edith of Wessex. This was the wife of Edward the Confessor, the last king of England prior to the Norman invasion. Her husband the king died during that invasion, but Queen Edith lived 9 years longer. And we actually do know a good amount about her life, because she commissioned a book, Vita Edwardi Regis, or The Life of King Edward, in honor of her late husband. December 18th, 1118 AD. The city of Zaragoza in Spain is conquered by King Alfonso I of Aragon. That is one of the Spanish kingdoms. It is in what is now northern Spain, modern day. Zaragoza had previously been under Muslim rule, and King Aragon I was a Christian, and he converted the city to Christendom. This is part of what is known as the Reconquista. Over the course of several centuries, several Christian rulers from northern Spain took land back from the Muslim Moors who had conquered parts of Spain during the Islamic Golden Age, and gradually turned the land back to Christendom, just in time for 1492 Columbus to sail the ocean blue sent by King Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. December 18th, 1271. The painting you're looking at is Kublai Khan, grandson of the world-famous Genghis Khan. His immediate ancestors had conquered most of the Eurasian landmass, and now it was left to Kublai and many of his cousins to govern it. Kublai Khan, for his part, became the founder of the Yuan dynasty in China, and on this date, in 1271, he proclaimed the Great Yuan dynasty and officially got that dynasty started. December 18th, 1499, the uprisings in Alpujarra. Speaking of the Reconquista, shortly after the official start of the Spanish Golden Age, there were some forced conversions going on of Muslims to the Catholic faith in southern Spain, formerly the Kingdom of Granada. Catholic troops were quickly mobilized, the rebellion was quickly put down. This did lead to larger rebellions down the line, but big picture, Spain is largely Catholic today. December 18th, 1655, this was the end of the Whitehall Conference. This conference was convened by Oliver Cromwell. This was during England's weird non-monarchist time. Cromwell could pretty much be thought of as the head of state during this time. And the purpose of this conference was to consider the question of whether Jews should be allowed back in England. Prominent figures from all sorts of fields were considered and gave their points of view. Merchants, religious leaders, military leaders, each had various reasons for wanting or not wanting to allow the Jews back in. The conclusion of this conference was that the Edict of Expulsion of the year 1290, which was the edict that expelled the Jews from England, that law itself did not forbid Jewish resettlement after they had already been kicked out. December 18th, 1787, the state of New Jersey becomes the third U.S. state to ratify the brand new U.S. Constitution. Before the Constitution, of course, America operated under the Articles of Confederation, which was not really a sustainable system of government, reason being the central government was defanged so much. The states had freedom to contradict each other and bicker amongst themselves, while the central authority couldn't really do anything about it. But now, after the 1787 Constitutional Convention, the United States would be governed by the system of government we know today. December 18th, 1833, God Save the Tsar. This piece of music was the national anthem for the Russian Empire. That was before the Bolsheviks did their thing, killed the monarchs, held two separate revolutions in Russia, and ultimately turned the land into the Soviet Union. However, long before that, on this date in 1833, that is when this piece of music was first performed. December 18th, 1854, the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Canada abolishes what is known as the seigneurial system. This was a system of land allocation in Quebec. It was a quasi-feudal system, and lots of economists say that this is part of what held Canada back in the 19th century. However, at the end of 1854, this system was no more. December 18th, 1865. This is a photograph of United States Secretary of State for Abraham Lincoln, William Seward. And on that date, he announced that the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution had been officially adopted. The states had ratified it, and now this was added to our supreme law of the land. The 13th was the one that prohibited slavery. It was the first in a series of 3 amendments following the Civil War, having to do with the integration of former slaves back into society. And if you want to put your high and mighty hat on for political debates on Twitter, simply memorize the exception to this prohibition on slavery. People sentenced by a judge for a crime can be compelled to commit involuntary labor. But if you're not found guilty of a crime in a court of law, you're safe. December 18th, 1892, this is the date of death for Sir Richard Owen. He was a famous paleontologist, contributed a lot to the field of paleontology, best known for being the person who came up with the term Dinosauria, or as we know it today, dinosaur, meaning terrible lizard. and was considered to have had a unique gift for identifying fossils. October 18th, 1892. This day was the premiere for The Nutcracker. This was a famous stage play by an even more famous Russian music composer, Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky, by the way, also known for 1812 Overture. More cannons. As for the plot itself, the story was readapted a couple times. There was at least one version going around in 1816, that was a while before Tchaikovsky's time, and it was probably told orally before it was written down. But Tchaikovsky was the one who put the famous music to it and brought it to life on stage. December 18th, 1898, this was the date of the first recorded speed record for an automobile. This record was recorded in France on a Jintao car by one Mr. Gaston. I won't even try to pronounce his last name. This car reached 63 kilometers per hour, which comes out to around 39 miles per hour. And believe it or not, France was actually a big place for early cars. We're talking before mass production, when they were still just a toy for the rich. In America, around this time, we had the Dodge brothers and a few others. But it really was not until Henry Ford that Detroit got put on the map, at least in terms of car manufacturing, and that cars finally became affordable for the average person. Ford's philosophy, of course, was that someone who works in one of his factories should be able to afford to buy the things that they're making. December 18th, 1916, this is the end of the Battle of Verdun in the First World War, one of the longest-lasting battles of the war, stretching all the way from February to December, the better part of an entire year. This happened in a place called Verdun, of course, in France. Hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides, both wounded and dead. A classic example of the kind of trench warfare dragging on forever characteristic of the First World War. That type of warfare being one of the reasons this war had so many casualties. And at the end of this, does it really matter who won this one? Not to be all hippy-sappy, but it sort of seems like everyone lost here. And the only reason this is not one of the most remembered and talked about battles and wars in human history is because just a few decades later, an even bigger war overshadowed it. December 18th, 1917. This is the day when the U.S. Congress approved the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. That amendment being prohibition. And if you want a little trick to remember which one this is, you had to be 18 to buy beer before Prohibition, 18th Amendment, and you had to be 21 to buy alcohol after. 21st Amendment undid Prohibition. Also, something to note, this was approved by Congress on December 18th, but it still needed to be ratified by the states, which it was a couple months later. In terms of historic hindsight is 2020 moments by the U.S., this one certainly makes the top 3 list alongside Vietnam. Far from actually reducing the popularity of alcohol throughout the country. Speakeasies opened up all over. Hillbillies from every hill town in Appalachia opened up secret brewing and bootlegging operations. A lot of those places even today have street racing traditions that started during this time from people outrunning cops carrying alcohol. And there was so much protest against this that the government had to undo it. December 18th, 1939, the Battle of Heligoland Bight. This was during the Second World War. The British Royal Air Force, RAF, was going after some German, strictly military, non-civilian targets. Happened near the Heligoland Islands and the surrounding waters that is in the North Sea close to Germany and Denmark. British sent 22 Vickers Wellington bombers. You can see a photograph of one of those here. Of those, they lost 12 of them. The Germans did pretty well defending their assets, had relatively few deaths and relatively few vehicles destroyed. December 18th, 1944, during World War II, XX Bomber Command, that is the United States Army Air Force for those keeping track at home, responds to a Japanese offensive in China, namely Operation Ichigo, responds with a massive bombing campaign of their own, 500 tons of incendiary dropped, on a Japanese supply base in Hankow, China. China, of course, throughout most of the war was struggling to keep itself together, literally. When the war started, they were already in the middle of a pretty fierce civil war. At the time that Japan struck them, they were very vulnerable. And the American government did not like this. In fact, even before Pearl Harbor, the U.S. for some time tried economic sanctions against Japan to discourage them from further aggression. That, did not work. December 18th, 1944, this is the day of a significant U.S. Supreme Court decision. That was Korematsu v. United States. President FDR had previously issued his Executive Order 9066. That was following the Pearl Harbor attack. 3 guesses which executive order that one was. That's right, internment camps for Japanese. This photograph here is Fred Korematsu. He is one of the Japanese Americans who was interred. He waged a legal battle against the U.S. government for the freedom of Japanese in America. And ultimately, the Supreme Court of the U.S., the highest court in the land, the president's executive order so the internment camps would stand. December 18th, 1958, this was the launch date for Project SCORE, Signal Communications by Orbiting Relay Equipment. This was the world's first communication satellite, and although NASA had technically been around since July of this very same year, within the first 6 months of NASA, the U.S. Army actually launched this one, and it was up, orbiting, and functional in time to broadcast a Christmas message from President Eisenhower. An onboard tape recorder played that message to millions of Americans via shortwave radio. December 18th, 1972. This is the date of death for Nylia Hunter Biden. If you recognize the last name, that's because this was the first wife of Joe Biden, former president if you can believe such things. Her cause of death was a car crash within just weeks of her husband being elected to Senate. I wonder if she knew Hillary Clinton. December 18th, 1972. As part of the Vietnam War, President Nixon announces on this day the beginning of Operation Linebacker 2, which was a series of Christmas bombings in North Vietnam, beginning on the 18th and going all the way to the 29th. This after some failed negotiations during the war. December 18th, 1981. This is the date of the first flight of the Soviet heavy bomber, the Tupolev Tu-160. This plane is notable for being the largest combat aircraft on record, also the largest supersonic aircraft. This was the Soviet response to the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress. December 18th, 1992. This is the date of death for Mark Goodson. If you're not familiar, he was the producer for a number of game shows, including Family Feud and The Price is Right. He died of pancreatic cancer at the age of 77. December 18th, 1997, this is the date of death for Chris Farley. You might know him from Saturday Night Live. He was on that show between 1990 and 95. He died, however, at the age of 33. He was found dead in his apartment. The cause of death was ruled as an overdose, combination of heroin and cocaine, known on the streets as speedball. Don't do drugs, kids. Drugs are bad, okay? December 18th, 2002. This picture is California Governor Gary Davis. Having recently won his re-election campaign, on this day he announced that the state had a budget deficit of $35 billion with a B billion dollars, which was a lot higher than he claimed it was during his campaign. This announcement would lead to a successful governor recall campaign, kicking him out of office before his official term was fully up, and the end result of that was Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. December 18th, 2007, this is the date of death for William Strauss. Among other things, he was an author, and among other things, he was known for coining the term millennial, as in the millennial generation. He died of pancreatic cancer at the age of 60. December 18th, 2008, this is the date of death for an underrated actress, Mayel Barrett. She played various roles throughout most of the Star Trek series, including as the voice of the computer interfaces throughout nearly all of them until her death in 2008. In fact, she was so involved in the series because she was the wife of Gene Roddenberry. She died of leukemia at the age of 76. December 18th, 2008, this is the date of death for Mark Felt. He was an FBI agent and law enforcement officer, best known for being a whistleblower in the Watergate scandal. He lived to the ripe old age of 95. December 18th, 2015, on this day, Kellingley Colliery, which was the last deep coal mine in the UK, officially closes operations. This is part of a broader picture of the UK government trying to shift its energy economy in a way that lowers its carbon footprint, and Scotland in particular is very proud of its wind power. That is a government that very much buys into climate change theory. December 18th, 2019, this is the day of the first impeachment of Donald Trump. A man who promised to build a wall on the southern border of the United States got elected to President of the United States. American Democrats super did not like this. I forget exactly what pretense they used to do this, but they made up their minds at least 3 years before this that they were going to stand against him any way they could. Now, the way removal from office works is the House of Representatives charges the president with a crime, and then the Senate convicts them. The House of Reps got the votes successfully multiple times to impeach him, but they never had the votes in the Senate to actually remove him from office.